What's up, everyone, and welcome back to the EDM Prosperity Network Mindset Mastery Mini-Course. I am your host, Alex Nelson, and in today's video, we are going to be covering how to attain and maintain a creative flow. Now, when I say flow, what I mean is this state that many of us who are creators in our own way, whether it's art or music or even just a presentation for work, we get into this state where we are not overthinking things. We are just connected with the work that we are doing, and it seems almost as if things just spill out of us. There's this real sense of fluidity to how we are creating something. We feel especially able to bring really good ideas to the forefront, and we're able to have them almost pour out of us as if they're not even coming from us. And it's characterized by this state of total presence. Again, we're not overthinking or agonizing over little details, and also the sense of flow, where we are just moving between what is in our mind and in our heart and putting it down, whether it's into Ableton or into some art project we're working on, and we're able to create really efficiently. And this state of flow is highly desirable for artists because it's really the state in which our best work tends to come out to the forefront. And so many artists I've talked to, myself included, have trouble with this. We sometimes find ourselves deep in the flow, but it's not a frequent enough experience, and then often we find ourselves in a state of writer's block where we kind of sit down, we open up Ableton, and we stare at it for an hour and nothing productive gets done. So in today's video, I'm going to be talking about how to attain that state of flow more frequently, and also talking about what to do when you are not in that state of flow. How can you still get something done that feels productive, or even optimize the chance that you would in the future get into the state of flow. Now, before I talk about all the different strategies here, I'm going to recommend a book which I've found deeply impactful, and I know a ton of different artists have found impactful as well. And it's a book called The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. Now, this book goes over in detail a couple of different ideas around flow and around the things that prevent us from getting flow. And one of the really important concepts talked about in this book is this idea of resistance. And Steven Pressfield almost talks about resistance as if it's an ephemeral, force out in the universe that causes us to not take action on our goals. And I think it's a really useful concept because we've all had that experience where sitting down, we're going, I should really write some music today, I should really work on this project. And there's a secondary force inside of us that kind of says, no, don't do that. Like, just scroll TikTok or watch some YouTube videos or do something instead of actually doing the work that you're there to do. And when we can identify that force within ourselves and prepare ourselves for it, it actually optimizes for the chance that we will, in the future, get into a state of flow, because ultimately, the resistance is this piece of us that is limiting us. We talked in a previous video about limiting beliefs. Those can come from a lot of different places, but the resistance is this piece of us that says, don't make anything today. Don't create. Don't do something adventurous that might expand your horizons. And so when we talk about flow, I think it's really, really important to understand first resistance, because it's something we all come up against in our own different little ways. And one of my favorite topics in the book is just this idea that you are going to experience resistance as an artist, one way or another. It is going to come up for you at some point in time. There are going to be those days where you don't feel especially inspired, where you feel disconnected from your work. And the idea Steven Pressfield puts forward is those are the days where it's actually especially important that you sit the hell down and do your work. And he has this really, really beautiful idea, which is the idea of the muse. When we have that special energy come into the room that allows us to create something especially beautiful, he puts forward the idea that if we want the muse to know where to find us, we should be sitting down to do our work every day. It's almost, rather than waiting for the muse to magically strike on a random day, we sit down at the same place at the same time and we do our work so that the muse knows where we're at. We've got a schedule that the muse can show up to if and when the muse deems it is useful. Now, it's a bit of a, spiritual concept, let's say, but I think we can concretize this by thinking about the muse as just that creative energy, that sense of really being able to pour into our work. And I'm sure we've all experienced that there's some days where we feel like maybe I'm not that energized, I don't feel that good about things, I don't think I'm going to make anything good today. And then we sit down and we actually make something awesome. And vice versa, there are days where we feel great, we feel like everything's amazing and we're doing super well, and we sit down to create something and we can't get a single good idea out. And so it really kind of drives home this concept that For us to meet that sense of flow and to sort of summon the muse more frequently, we want to have some consistency to our schedule. Stephen Pressfield talks about a lot in the context of writing and really puts down this idea of, hey, if I'm sitting down to write at my desk every single day for 2 hours, I know that a certain amount of times in the week that muse or that flow is going to strike, and I will be there actually creating something when the muse is there versus missing that opportunity that might have been there that maybe I'm not prepared for. Another concept that's really, really important when it comes to flow is this concept of getting ourselves into a physical, emotional, and mental state in which we are ready to flow. So if we think about flow as total presence, total focus, the ability to really be dialed into what it is we are working on and to, summon forward that creative energy, we can think about the opposite of flow as being distracted, being overwhelmed or consumed by other things going on in our life, being overworked, stressed, underslept. And really, it's relatively simple advice, but if we want to experience flow more frequently, we want to dampen down all of those causes that interrupt us getting into flow. It means getting good sleep, eating well, working out, doing some physical activity, having conversations that are important to you so that you clear up any baggage emotionally that you're holding on to. When we do these things, we kind of clear up some bandwidth in the mind and we create space for flow to arrive because we're not being pulled out of the present moment by all of these thoughts of all of these other things we need to take care of. We're not being pulled out of the present moment by a lack of physical energy. We feel super sleepy. We haven't done anything good in the past couple days. We haven't eaten especially well. And so all of these are really simple ways to optimize for flow. Like if you are healthy, if you are emotionally wealthy, you're feeling good in your relationships, it is just much more likely that you will be able to get into a state of flow versus when you don't have any of those things. Now, additionally to this, when we're talking about flow, there is this component of not over analyzing or immediately judging whether we are in flow or not. I think for many artists this will show up as you sit down, you open up Ableton, and for the first hour you're just kind of doing whatever and it's not especially good and you're not really making any progress on any songs, and then like an hour in suddenly you hit a groove and suddenly you're locked in and you start to make some really good stuff and those really good ideas all come out in like 30 minutes and it's so productive. I almost look at that as you had to pay the price of the hour of doing not great work to get to the 30 minutes of doing really good work. And if you hadn't put in that hour, you would not have gotten to the 30 minutes of really good work. To put this in context of writing, for example, many writers will talk about that they have to write 3 bad pages before they get to 1 good paragraph. And it's that same idea of like we have to pay the price. We have to lock ourselves into the work that we are doing. And then over time, what happens is we open ourselves up and eventually that good idea comes out. And so giving yourself that space that you don't sit down at your DAW and go, okay, I'm going to write some music today. And then you immediately judge, oh, well, I'm not in the flow, so it's not even worth it. It's like you may well get into the flow a little bit further into the session. It just takes some time to kind of settle into what you're doing, to kind of clear some of the mental clutter out and to focus on what it is that's in front of you. Now, another really important concept I like to talk about with flow, especially as artists, where we get creatively blocked and we have some time where we can't think of good new ideas. I'm a huge advocate of batching your tasks. So I kind of put my tasks into a couple of different buckets related to music specifically in this case. And having these tasks in these different buckets helps me to identify what can I work on that's still productive when I'm not feeling especially creative. And this allows me to maintain a sense of forward momentum and to feel like I'm making progress on the things that I'm working on, because not every task is a creative task. If I'm going back through a song that I made 2 months ago, maybe not a lot needs to be done to it creatively, but maybe I need to mix and master it. I need to balance different audio levels. I need to go back through and just kind of edit the drums ever so slightly, change some loudness levels. Doing that doesn't require a lot of creativity. It is more of a tactical, just methodical, almost like working on a spreadsheet type of activity. And it's a great activity to do when I'm not feeling especially creative. And so I like to kind of batch out my tasks into these different buckets of what am I feeling inspired to do right now, or at least what can I do that will make forward progress. Hey, if I'm feeling today like I've been working on music for an hour and I'm not really making anything good that's new, okay, let me task switch into editing mode, as I call it. I'm going to go back and I'm going to edit some tracks. I'm going to get them that extra little bit of just tweaking, balancing, being ready to be put out into the world. And I don't need flow for that, but I can still arrive at the end of that day and feel really good about, like, wow, I made a bunch of progress. I finished a couple songs that were just almost finished before. Additionally, of course, we have creative. Writing a new song, creating a new melody. You can map this onto anything. It could be starting a new piece of art, sort of that first phase where we are making something from scratch, and it really requires the most of our creative juices flowing. And that could be kind of tasked into two different buckets as well. We can have the creative side of things where we know what we want to make and it spills out of us. And we can have the creative side of us where we're just playing around. It's the equivalent of pulling out a canvas and just starting painting some colors on it, seeing what looks good, and just experimenting, and seeing, oh, wow, that's dope. I like that. And, oh, that's less good. I don't like that. That's okay. And we experiment until we lock on to something that feels really good and, again, gets us into that sense of flow. And then perhaps as a third bucket, which we engage in, we also just have the process of taking in information. So alongside all of the productive work we do, where we put stuff out into the world, we can also take in information. That could be watching YouTube tutorials, that could be reading a book on music theory, all of these different tasks that are learning based, which can get us into a state of flow as well. We can acquire a new concept and go, oh, that would go really good on this other song that I have. And then we go do it and wow, we're in a deep state of flow. And so with these three buckets, I have different types of tasks I can work on different days, depending on how I'm feeling. But the result is I always feel like I'm making progress. I always feel like I'm moving things forward and my projects are advancing and I'm finishing songs, I'm creating new songs. And on the days where I'm feeling especially creative inspired, I can capture lightning and work on a new project. And on the days where I'm feeling a little bit less creatively inspired, I can finish old projects. I can mix and master. I can learn some new technique or watch a new tutorial and kind of learn new concepts that will help me to be in the flow in the future. Now, one last concept here when talking about flow is something that is accomplished when we have hit a critical level of competency, meaning we are good enough at the thing we are doing to be able to not too actively think about it. So if this is your first day writing music in Ableton, I would not expect you to be in flow at all. If this is your first day DJing, I would not expect you to get into the flow, because flow is characterized by a lack of thinking about it too much. We understand how the tools work, we know how to use them, and we're able to just kind of use them fluidly without having to think about, like, oh, what does Serum do again? How do I write a bass line? What's a drum pattern for dubstep? When there's too much thought, when we're first starting something and we're learning, we are not as frequently going to be in flow versus when we've gained a skill set of competency and we're able to do some of these things without thinking about them. So just, don't hold yourself back in the sense that if you're just beginning, you're just starting out, you haven't learned this thing yet, there is a threshold you have to cross of learning enough to be competent before you will achieve these states of flow. And a lot of times people will, when they're starting out, they'll really kind of trip themselves up because they go, well, this doesn't feel easy. I don't feel like I'm making good stuff. It's like, yeah, you're still learning. Like, you don't have the skills yet to be able to translate stuff that's in your head to the music. And once you gain those skills, everything can move a lot quicker. We can flow more fluidly between different parts of a song, and the ability to create what we are trying to create becomes much easier because we're not having to think about every little thing. We're not having to think about what hotkey does what, how do I do a frequency shift, how do I do some little tool for some little trick I heard in some other song. We know how to do it, and so we can just do it, and it doesn't interrupt that creative process and that flow. So all of this is to say, if you are looking to achieve more flow in your day-to-day life, there's just a few simple things you can do. First and foremost is clear the mental space. Have yourself in a calm and ready state to work on the things you're working on. And a lot of that's the stuff you do outside of whether it's music production or art creation, meditation, working out, eating clean, getting enough sleep, managing your relationships, as we talked about in a previous video. If we do all of those things, we've primed ourselves to be ready for the opportunity for flow. Then it's sitting down at a consistent time, or at least a semi-consistent time every single day, or at least a few days a week. 5 days a week is probably a minimum, give or take, for us to be accomplishing flow on a regular basis. And we are just putting our hours in. And we are showing up and committing to showing up, whether or not we feel in flow in that moment. And even when we don't feel like we're in flow, we stay with it, because there's the opportunity that we would get into the flow an hour in. And if we give up after 30 minutes because we don't like anything we're making, guess what? We never get to that point. Third, that concept of resistance, identifying, oh, there's this piece of me that doesn't want to do the work, and overcoming that. The resistance is the great liar. It will trick you in every possible way. It'll tell you need to clean your house instead of work on your music. And in that, you'll never feel good after giving into resistance. I think we've all experienced that, where we watch YouTube instead of making a song. At the end of the watching YouTube, we don't feel good. At the end of working on a song, even if we didn't make anything good, there's a sense of like, well, at least I tried. At least I tried to put some things in forward motion, and maybe I gained some new skills, I learned some new lessons. And so with that, there's that feeling of confidence that builds over time versus a feeling of avoidance that we're not doing the things we need to do. And then lastly, but not least, as I mentioned, kind of batching out your tasks. Have a bucket for editing, have a bucket for creative flow, have a bucket for fucking around, starting a new project, seeing what sticks, have a bucket for that sort of, learning phase and absorbing new information, and then choose intentionally which bucket you're pulling on based upon how you're feeling after a little while. And this will help you to accomplish flow on a more regular basis. So I hope all of this is helpful, and I hope many of you watching this experience more flow in your music production or your DJing or whatever it is that you're working on creatively. And if you liked the video and you got some useful information about it, let me know in the comments. And of course, feel free, if you have a question, you can either drop me a DM in the EDM Prosperity Network Discord, or you can drop a comment in the YouTube comments here, and I will try to get back to those. So much love, y'all, and I'll see you in the next video.